right. Hey, kids. Looks like we're good. How are you tonight? If you're able to hear me right now, if you could just throw something in the chat so I know, it'd be great. Good, Michael. Thank you. All right. Just as a reminder that this is going to be recorded, it's only recorded and it's listed as unlisted. So only somebody who has off center, that's going to bother me. Only someone who has the link to it posted online by me via Google Classroom is going to be able to see that. But just in case, wanted to give you the heads up. We're going to get started here with the Chapter 13 review questions. These are the AP style questions that don't have answers in the answer key in the back of the book there. And we'll start up with that in just a few minutes. But first, wanted to see any questions that you have for me regarding any of the material from Chapter 13. Questions about the DBQ, anything's fair game for the first couple of minutes here. Okay, I'll give it another 2 minutes in case anyone else shows up and has any questions regarding content from Chapter 13 before we jump into the actual questions here. This one's going to go just a little bit quicker than the last one did. Last one, I think we spent like 40 minutes or so together. This one should be closer to 20 to 30 to go through all 10 of those questions. Just as a quick programming note, U.S. men's national team is playing Jamaica right now in World Cup qualifying. This is the same Jamaica team who knocked them out in qualifying for the most recent World Cup. Not that I'm still upset about it or anything like that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get going. It looks like there are only 4 of you, so we may as well just have a nice casual conversation here. And if you need me to stop at any point here to go over anything more specifically, just ask. Throw something into the chat and I'll see it. I'm going to be bouncing around between the textbook questions and a couple of other things that I have pulled up just in case. And yeah, here we go. So first one, the first reading here is Calvinism. Okay, cases heard by the Calvinist Provincial Synod at Cleve, early 17th century. So that's early 1600s, as you can see by the dates. Case of one brother cursing another, young journeyman. So this is within the guild system still. Journeyman set up house with a maid and got her pregnant. The preacher asked him to marry her or send her away. He did neither. He was shunned from the community. Adopted a resolution of the Wessel class convention that couples who lived together before matrimony were to be disciplined. Their children were not to receive baptism. So these are all, the first thing that you should notice about all these is these are not physical cases. These seem to be more kind of morally based cases. And I think you have to start there. This idea that these are cases involving morality and behavior versus what we would look at today and look at and say that's breaking the law. Okay, so that should be in the back of your mind as you go through. Excerpts most directly reflect which of the following ideas? Calvinist criticisms of Catholic abuses. So read through that. That doesn't quite fit. As a side note, I did not do these first 3 because I wanted to kind of talk through my thought process in terms of how I would approach them to give you an idea from me, the way that I would look at it. So Calvinist criticisms of Catholic abuses, to me, that doesn't really make sense because that's not really what these excerpts are about. They don't have to do with the abuses from the Catholic Church, anything like even the Inquisition-y or anything like that. B, new Calvinist interpretations of Christian doctrine. I don't know that that's new interpretations in the back of my mind. These seem to be pretty by the book interpretations based on the Bible. We know that Calvinism, in addition to Lutheranism, is looking at, hey, let's get back to scripture only. So maybe that's in the back of my mind. The Calvinist belief that the state should be subordinate to the church. That strikes me as one that jumps out immediately just because I'm looking at laws of the religion and morality versus laws of the state. And then D, the Calvinist belief that children of unmarried couples should not be baptized. I mean, yeah, that's one of them, but to me, that's the last one. And so that doesn't fully encompass them. So just as I look through and analyze each one of them, I would say C is the answer to that one. Any questions or thoughts that you have on it? Okay. Let's go to number 2. Calvinist ideas would have been most influenced by which of the following? A, ideals of the Christian humanists regarding Catholic abuses. B, Catholic reforms that were a result of the Council of Trent. Oh, I forgot to talk my way through. Ideals of the Christian humanists regarding Catholic abuses. Um, eh, Maybe because we're talking about influence here. So possibly B, Catholic reforms that were a result of the Council of Trent. I mean, Council of Trent, 1545. I guess it's possible, but these don't strike me as reforms, right? The Catholic reforms that we saw were not doctrinal. These were procedural, right? How priests got their jobs and how priests were educated. Anabaptist doctrines, they are Calvinists and Anabaptists are not friends. They're not buddies. So to me, that wouldn't make sense. And even if you just take a small snippet, the Anabaptists believed in waiting until baptism, until later on, and choices that go along with it. So that wouldn't make much sense to me. Ideals of the Jesuits, I'm not really seeing like education as a piece of it. So to me, I'm looking at A and B, and I think it's got to be A if I'm choosing between those two. Ideals of the Christian humanists, because the Christian humanists were the ones who were talking about we got to get back to strictly what's in the Bible, strict adherence to the Bible, and those kinds of things. So I think that that's the best answer to that question. Number 3, during and after the Reformation, the task of regulating, here's our morality. The task of regulating morality violations, such as those stated above, was mostly carried out by, okay, so A, Catholic bishops, they're too big time. They're dealing with more big picture, big macro stuff to me. Monarchs, again, it seems too big. C, local pastors, maybe, but knowing what we know about Calvinism and its influence on city government, I think it's got to be D, city governments, for that one. As I go through those, again, that concept of Calvinism that religious law is kind of in conjunction with or above the laws of the local governments. Questions on either of those last two in that section? How do we feel on this section so far? Can we get like a, hey, I feel good about 1, 2, or 3 of them? Any that you want me to go back to and give some logic behind? Okay. That's good. And again, I know it doesn't look awesome as a quiz grade, but if you feel pretty okay about 2 out of 3 in terms of your answer and your understanding, that's a really good start. Again, you're doing these for the first time. There's a lot of content to get through in addition to learning kind of stylistically how they work. Yes, no, it will be posted. Yeah. I'll post it on Classroom. Okay. Mia, is there anything specifically you want me to go back to in terms of my explanations? Yeah, no problem. Okay, Mia, if you think of something that you want me to go back to and re-explain, just type it in there. I'll check back in. Okay. But let's move on to the next section here. So next segment, if you're following along, hopefully in the online textbook or your hard copy. Let's see. So this is coming from Erasmus, The Praise of Folly. Hey, we've read that, or at least excerpts from it. Those who are closest to these, theologians, in happiness are generally called the religious or monks, both of which are deceiving names, since for the most part they stay as far away from religion as possible and frequent every sort of place. Though most people detest these men so much that accidentally meeting one is considered to be bad luck, the monks themselves believe that they are magnificent creatures. One of their chief beliefs is that to be illiterate is to be of a high state of sanctity, and so they make sure that they are not able to read. Another is that when braying out there, notice the word choice there, braying as if associated with donkey or a jackass. They are making themselves very pleasing and satisfying to God when in fact they are uttering these psalms as a matter of repetition rather than from their hearts. Many work so hard at protocol and traditional fastidiousness that they think one heaven hardly suitable reward for their labors, never recalling, however, that the time will come when Christ will demand a reckoning of that which he had prescribed, namely charity. He will hold their deeds of little account. There's a lot in there. First of all, shout out to you, Erasmus. He's a very he eviscerates the clergymen in this work. What school of thought did Erasmus's writing most closely identify with? So we're on question number 4 here. And this is very obviously, I think this is just reading comprehension. You don't need even the reading to be able to do this one. It's Christian humanism. He is like the quintessential Christian humanist. Number 5, the ideas expressed in this excerpt most directly address the prevailing idea in the 16th century that the Catholic Church needed to accept new interpretations of Christian doctrine and practice. The Council of Trent revived Catherine doctrine. Religious conflicts would become a basis for challenging monarchical control. The Catholic Church needed to address the issues of church abuses. All right, after having gone through those, take a minute and let's say 10 seconds. In 10 seconds from now, why don't you type the answer A, B, C, or D? I'll give you the countdown here. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Type a letter. All right, I think it's D, and I think it's D for a couple of reasons. And if you have your own thoughts, you can obviously type them in there. Those definitely can help your classmates out too, if you're not sure. But I think it's D, and here's why I think it's D. We know that Erasmus is Catholic. We know he is not trying to break off and pull a Luther. And if we know that, then we need to think, okay, which one of these matters? So in addition to using CAP for like a DBQ, or as we look at documents together in class, CAP is important for us as we look at the different sources that we have on the multiple choice questions. And so if we know Erasmus is a Christian humanist and Christian humanists generally are looking for reforms within the church, I think D becomes that much easier to recognize as the answer to this. Not accepting new interpretations of Christian doctrine and practice, that's more Luthery, right? That's much more Luthery. Council of Trent revived Catholic doctrine. I mean, they did, but okay, I don't know how this excerpt necessarily contributes to that, or expresses that idea. Religious conflicts would become a basis for challenging monarchical control. I think you should be able to cross that one off the list right away. And so I think D is really the best answer here, knowing what we know about Erasmus in general.
Erasmus, what name? No comment?
No comment.
Erasmus.
Which of the following developments best represents a long-term effect of Christian humanism? Now, some keys here, kids. When you see long-term or short-term, those are not placed there by accident. As being someone who has normed a standardized test before, I standardized the praxis exam, the kind of teacher exam for middle-level educators in the past, it is a process where every piece of language is scrutinized as these questions go forward. So when you see something that is more specific than just effect, it is a long-term effect of Christian humanism, that should stick out to you. So as we look at 6, we're thinking about long-term. All right, cool. Catholic unity throughout Europe. Even beyond just reading what you read, we have to know that this is not the case, right? Catholic unity is kind of a thing of the past. We're not going to see anything approaching the power that the church had during medieval Europe ever again. Religious plurality in France, as evidenced through the Edict of Nantes. Well, yeah, that's kind of a thing, but then, and again, we're not quite there yet, but then Louis XIV is going to reinstitute Catholicism. He's going to revoke the Edict of Nantes in something called the Edict of Fontainebleau in 1640s, question mark. Religious conflict in Europe until the mid-17th century. Maybe. The religious conflict, we're definitely going to see some of that moving forward. The implementation of new religious orders such as the Jesuits. That's possible too, but I don't know that that's a long-term effect just of Christian humanism. Yeah, the Jesuits are in response to Reformation in general, but I think they're less a representation of that than they are just the prevailing movement. Best represents long-term effect of Christian humanism. To me, as I look at this for number 6, I'm thinking C. Anyone have any justifications one way or another? Like it, don't like it? I think it's C. We already see kind of the religious wars popping up in this chapter. That's only going to continue as we jump into the 30 Years' War, which starts out as a primarily religious conflict, and then is going to kind of develop into a more political conflict from there. I think it's C for 6. Number 7, how did the Catholic Church ultimately respond to ideas such as those expressed in the passage? So what is the Catholic Church's response? A, helping to spread the faith in areas outside of Europe. B, by enacting reform through the Council of Trent. Well, we know that's true, but let's look at the rest of the answers. Agreeing to give monarchs and princes more power to implement religious reform at a local level? No, if anything, we're starting to see those monarchs and princes move away from religious-based government control. And then D, accepting new interpretations of Luther and Calvin. We know that's not the case because at the Council of Trent, they denied everything that Luther and Calvin spoke about, only addressing kind of practices and ensuring things like the priests are going to be trained. They can't the idea of being a priest at more than one place, that's not going to happen. So B's got to be the answer for number 7. Council of Trent, we do see some reforms. Then 8 through 10, in short, so we have this work here. Let's see what it is. A political interpretation of the Reformation. So now this is interesting because now it's not just about religion, right? They are acknowledging that there's a political way to view the events of the Reformation. This is coming out in 1990, so we know that this is a scholarly work of the later time. Which of the following statements? Let's see. Sorry, a bunch of questions. I didn't jump back. Going back to number 5, I was against D because I didn't see any abuses. No, you're not going to see the abuses, but they're referencing 5 is not seeing any abuses in there. It's a response to the abuses of the Catholic Church that the document is detailing, not necessarily the abuses themselves, but discussing the kind of responses to them. Jaden, it's possible that C would have happened either way, but that is less between nations and groups and more within nations. I think we see, especially the 30 Years' War that goes from 1618 to 1648. So that's mid-17th century. That is kind of one of the defining conflicts of European history. It's tough because, again, that's next chapter. We didn't get there yet, or 2 chapters. We're not there yet, but that based on historical context, that's got to be the best answer for that question, the fighting. I understand your point with the Reconquista, Spain reconquering Granada in Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, and the expulsion of the Jews. But I think it's referring more towards like larger conflicts. Hey, what's up, Alex? How are you? When would something have to go on to be considered long term? Oh goodness. I have no idea. I really don't have a good answer for that question. The only thing that I would tell you is that's the difference between historical context of a document, as in cap, um, versus the like contextualization, which is like a larger, broader thematic idea, as opposed to it being an immediate thing. So think of it more as like, here's something that happened immediately at this particular time versus a trend that continues for longer periods of time. And that would be kind of the what I would use to gauge long term versus short term. Okay, so Christian humanism. If you're going to hear a name with Christian humanism, it's Erasmus. Erasmus is the guy, Christian humanist. He is critical of the church. However, he believes that reform needs to come from within the church itself, that the Catholic Church in and of itself as an entity is a good, positive force in the world, but it needs to adjust the practices and the people that are in there in order to get back to kind of more faith-based, okay? Lutheranism is we need to start a brand new religion. We tried this whole thing. You saw how the Pope came at me with my 95 Theses. The Pope's reaction to this indicates that the Pope is no longer acting in the best interests of the religion of Christianity anymore. The Pope is now acting in a way that serves as selfish, self-serving needs, as opposed to being guided by the Bible. And that's why he says things like, show me in the Bible where I'm wrong. Show me where I'm wrong and I'll go away. And the Pope continues to kind of call him out and call him selfish and blah, blah, blah. And so he says, you can't, okay? You're talking about things that do not have a basis in Scripture. And so you can't come at me like that. And so that's the biggest difference between the two. One, Christian humanism still wants to be Catholic, but wants to change and do so. Like one of the differences with Lutheranism is he's changing things, like re-examining transubstantiation. He's re-examining how many sacraments there are. Like these are big wholesale changes. Christian humanists would not go that far. Okay. Did that help for those of you talking about Christian humanists? Sure. Eunice, number 3. Yeah, we can go back to number 3 real quick. So number 3 is coming from the Calvinist cases heard before the synod, provincial synod. It's a written test. It's a church council, okay? And number 3, during and after the Reformation, the task of regulating morality violations such as those stated above was mostly carried out by. So this is who is carrying out morality violations for number 3. And at first glance, we would probably think local pastors, but I think if you go back into the section in Calvinism in the textbook, it hits upon the idea of Calvinism being the basis of rule of law for cities' governments in some of these places. And so because of its influence over those city places, that's why the Holy Roman Empire is so against allowing the princes in the Peace of Augsburg in 1555 to choose Calvinism. Peace of Augsburg says, okay, you know what? Well, fine. You can be the princes and kings of these duchies can choose either Lutheranism or Catholicism, and that's that. They cannot choose Calvinism, and it's because of Calvinist influence on city governments. The idea that and the belief that religious law should supersede other laws. And so that should be what the city councils are using to guide these disputes. Kind of the influence of Calvinist thought on local government. All right, number 8, which of the following statements of the Reformation can be inferred from the political interpretation by Elton? Many princes and monarchs took advantage of religious reform in an effort to gain greater political and economic control. The Reformation in England. First of all, as I'm reading that, I like the look of that one already. Many princes and monarchs took advantage of religious reform in an effort to gain greater political and economic control. If we look back at this work, England provided the extreme example of this doctrine in action with its rapid social switches from Henrician, sure, something, Catholicism without the Pope, through Edwardian Protestantism on the Swiss model and Marian papalism to Elizabethan Protestantism of a more specifically English brand. The Reformation was successful beyond the dreams of earlier, potentially similar, smaller, blah, blah, blah. Desire for Christian lands, resistance to imperial. So when I read this, A really is jumping out to me. Many princes and monarchs took advantage of religious reform in an effort to gain greater political and economic control. And this relates to the idea that your textbook mentions a few times with some of these different leaders of being a politique, using religion versus being completely married to the religion, and strictly adhering to its doctrines, but using it in an effort to consolidate political power. Reformation, let's just double check the other answers. Reformation in England was the only reform movement initiated for political reasons. That's not true. Religious conflicts were justifiable reason to challenge political authority. Maybe issues of religion intensified the conflicts between monarchies and nobility now. So yeah, A is the answer for number 8 for sure. No, it's going to be posted online, my friend. Number 5, are you saying that the practices the monks themselves were brought about because of the abuse of the church? Sort of. I think that I think I can interpret what you're saying there. I think so for number 5. Let's go back to 5 and then I'll do 1 and 2. Yeah, so it's the ideas in the passage most directly address the prevailing idea that the Catholic Church needed to address the issue of church abuses. So if you look at this document from Erasmus, he's talking about the abuses of the basically the fat cats, right? The higher ups within the Catholic Church and how they're abusing their power and their standing for personal means, and they're not paying attention to the role of what exactly they're supposed to be doing. And as a result, they're going to eventually be brought before Christ. So 5, Catholic Church needed to address the issue of church abuses. That's letter D. I think that's what you're getting at there, Liam. All right, now I'll go back to 1 and 2 for you, sir. The excerpts above most directly reflect which of the following ideas. As we look at those, if you go back to that, the answer here is C, Calvinist belief that the state should be subordinate to the church. That relates back to number 3. We kind of talked about that idea again with regards to number 3. The church law should supersede all else, and that's why eventually this is going to be, in number 3, brought before city councils versus by local pastors. And then 2, Calvinist ideas would have been most influenced by which of the following? As you look at number 2, I think we said, right off the bat, ideals of Christian humanists regarding Catholic abuses. The other ones don't really fit. A C and D definitely don't fit. So you should be able to eliminate both of those right off the bat. And if you're deciding between A and D, the ideals of Christian humanists, so we're talking about causation here, right? Influence of those groups on the Calvinists, the Christian humanists. All right, let's get back and finish off 8 through 10 here. So we did 8. Princes and monarchs took advantage of the religion, again, relating to politiques. 9, religious civil wars influenced by political implications were not common during the 16th century. I think we can eliminate that one right off the bat because they kind of were. B, were best exemplified by the Habsburg leadership against Catholic unity during the 16th century. Well, That's definitely not true because the Habsburgs are Catholic. They're trying to unify the Catholic lands across Europe. C were best exemplified by the French Wars of Religion during the 16th century. So that's 1500. So that's the Valois, Habsburg Valois Wars. That's Henry of the Henry IV of Navarre. All of those things kind of coming in. And then D became even more commonplace after the Peace of Westphalia. That is not true after the 30 Years' War. Religious wars kind of go away. So it's got to be C for number 9. And then 10, which of the following countries or regions did lay authorities initiate religious reform? Real quick, who remembers what lay authorities are? Anybody? Yeah, those both of those work. So layman would be specifically in this time period. We're talking about people who are a part of the church community, but who are not official members of the church and not ordained. They don't hold an official position within the church. So, which of these countries or regions did authorities initiate religious reform who were not actually members of specifically the church itself? Spain, Habsburg lands in Eastern Europe, England during the rule of Henry VIII, or the Italian states. I'll give you about 20 seconds here. Consider it, and I'll give you a countdown from 10 seconds. You can type your answer and be ready to just hit enter at the conclusion of that. So give it some time, and then I'll give you a countdown, 10-second countdown starting soon. Okay, here we go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. That's it. There are 10 people. Take a guess, kids. It's okay to be wrong. Yeah, and that's why we're talking about these. All right, a couple of people in there. Yeah, the answer is C here. England during the rule of Henry VIII, because again, these decisions, Henry VIII is going to do away with the papacy being the official authority. He takes over authority. We call that the Act of Supremacy. 1534, I want to say, question mark. 1534 Act of Supremacy with him taking over as the head of the church in England. And so it's essentially this early kind of Anglican church is really just Catholicism without the Pope. And that's kind of what we're looking at. But what he does is push political friends into positions of power within this new Anglican church. And so that's really what we're looking at here. So these are non-religious folks, non-ordained folks who are making these religious decisions and changing things around. You should be able to eliminate D and A right off the bat, so you should have gotten yourself down. I could understand if you picked B, the Habsburg lands in Eastern Europe, simply because we have talked a lot about the Peace of Augsburg and the idea that these princes can make a decision. But within, that's kind of like, this is going to get really, really sticky. But yes, they can choose, but the decisions are still being made by the ordained people within those places. And so that, I think, is the distinction that they want you to draw here, which seems a little pedantic, but That's the way it is. It's the answer is definitely going to be C. I can tell you that. Anything else that you want me to go back through? We got about 5 minutes. Remember, I can't stress this enough. You really shouldn't be trying to cram for these quizzes. These are not quizzes that you sit down and really take the time to study every single nook and cranny. Get the big idea, get some examples, and I'd be more concerned with you using your notes to try and draw links. Okay, where do we see some similarities between some of these ideas versus yeah, I can do that. Versus trying to cram. All right, so I'm going to read directly from a section in the textbook here. Celebrating individualism, so your individual relationship with God, individual learning, etc., and secularism, meaning to a point non-religious. Now, the earliest humanists, like Petrarch, the father of modern humanism, he says basically, you can have an individual relationship with God. You can have individual success in your measurement of success without it being anti-religious. Was the defining intellectual movement of the Renaissance, changed the way Europeans perceive the world, encouraged skepticism of traditional authorities, study of the classics. Those are like the big concepts here that your textbook is hitting on. The emergence of humanism and growth of interest in intellectual pursuits among wealthy laymen led to the proliferation of humanist schools and tutors. Education was primarily for the elite, but Renaissance humanists promoted the study of the humanities within these schools, studying, again, classical works of Greece and Rome. And so what humanism is really all about is moving away from like this total overarching centralized school of knowledge that is coming from the church and is specifically religiously based, and anything else is going to be considered heretical. And so humanism is really about the idea that you should be able to find individual value, individual intellect, individual education, and not be heretical. They're not anti-religious, even though there are secular pieces to it, right? The studying of Greek and Roman classics, whether it's philosophy or whatever it may be, that's not inherently religious, but Petrarch would say that that's not anti-religious either. And so that's where kind of the ideas of humanism are really coming from. Those big tenets: individualism, secularism, again, non-religious, not anti-religious, individual learning. Any last thoughts as I finish up with some emails here? Stick around for another minute. So differences between them, I would say, are relationship of the church and state with Lutheranism and Calvinism. Liam, did you take a look at the document that I posted 2 days ago that has kind of a breakdown of all of these major reformations? Yeah, Celeste, same thing. I posted a document 2 days ago. Is it going to let me share my screen? Probably not, huh? Not on YouTube. Let's see if I can just post the link. 1 second, kids. I think you should be able to view this. I'll post this in the chat here. Opposed to going through all of these. And good news, the Anabaptists are there as well. But in terms of what I would use to differentiate between them, I would think I would say, all right, how do they view faith? What does faith look like? Catholicism, we're talking about good deeds, right? That's not the case in Lutheranism, right? It's faith alone. In Calvinism, good works might work, but that's just evidence. It's not necessarily something that's there. Proper relationship between church and state. Luther, remember, you have to be obedient to the law. Remember how he reacts to the German peasant revolt. Whereas for Calvinism, thinking about Geneva, especially, which is like the strong point there, it's the religion is going to dominate the state. And so I think as you look at these, I would look at faith. What's the relationship between church and state with those ideas? And then I would look at kind of where the power base is. I think that would, like, the geography of the situation might help you with the politics. Explain the lineage connections between the monarchs of England and Spain. Yeah. So here's what I would tell you. I don't think that you need to know every single detail of this, but I do think it's helpful as we look at the bigger relationship between England and Spain to understand. So initially, Henry VIII's brother is going to be the monarch and is the monarch. And so he is set to marry the daughter or niece of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, based out of Spain. And so they are uniting Catherine of Aragon. They are uniting England and Spain together. And that's what you do, right? You unite these groups together. Anybody who's seen Game of Thrones understands what we're talking about here. Unite the clans. That will kind of keep them from becoming rivals. Okay, cool. Now, when she can't produce him a male heir, this results in an attempt at annulment of the marriage by Henry VIII. That upsets Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, because obviously this is his family. You're now saying we're not good enough for you. You're decrying us. What are you talking about? And then on top of that, you're dealing with the Pope. And the Pope's like, no, I'm not going to do that because I have Charles V's men breathing down my neck. So it's at this point that Henry VIII breaks away from the Catholic Church and forms the Anglican Church with himself as the head. That does two things. So religiously, we have the start of this new religion, which will eventually be kind of what we would think of as English Protestantism or Anglican Church. And then it also results in political issues between Spain and England. Down the line, again, we don't have to go too far into the different spouses of Henry VIII, the ones who are decapitated and whatnot. But down the line, eventually his daughter from his second marriage ends up on the throne. She is Protestant, and she reverts to the Anglican Church, she reverts to Protestantism. And this now sets her on a direct collision course with Philip II of the militant Catholicist son of Charles V. And so that sets not only religious conflict between those groups, not only familial conflict between those groups, but now we're also talking about political conflict between those groups, because Philip II believes that the best way to address the issues going on in Europe during this time is strong, unified Catholic nations. And so he's involved in plots to try and help overthrow Elizabeth. He sends the Spanish Armada there in 1588, which, according to the English, by the grace of God, is swept away in a storm and defeated. And this kind of resulting mess is that while Spain is not going to be totally destroyed as a result of this, it kind of sets those two on different paths. If you've ever seen like win expectancy for two teams as they cross paths, that's England, and then Spain is down here. England will continue to grow. Spain will continue to fall, not completely, and it takes a while. I think that kind of immediate reactions to this are a little bit overblown, but it sets them both on different courses moving forward in European history. So as we look at Switzerland, in terms of the different cantons there, I would say, and I don't have a great answer for this question, I would say that, I would say that it has to do with, when we look at Switzerland, the kind of isolated nature of Switzerland politically moving forward, because Switzerland, the Swiss Guard, so this is going to get really deep. I have to go backwards first. The Swiss Guard, with their funny uniforms and whatnot, they are the most elite fighting force in the world, using pikes in the 13 and 1400s. They are hired mercenaries. They're phenomenal. They're generally looked at as the best European soldiers. But in part, as a result of kind of how Calvinism grows there, I would make the argument that due to that, Switzerland begins to become isolated because they don't have a strong link to some of these other groups. They're not going to be Catholic, so they're not going to ally themselves with the eventual Bourbon dynasty in France. They're not, obviously, they're not going to ally themselves with the Austrian Habsburgs either. They want to break away from that with the advent of Calvinism. They're definitely not going to align themselves with the Papal States, and so they're kind of isolated geographically as a result of that. So I would say that's kind of that's the importance of that religious piece, which results in political effects. What are the primary social outcomes of the burning of Jan Hus? Shout out to my homie Jan Hus. It's getting hot in here. So primary social outcomes, really nothing, except that these reformers are going to be a little bit more reluctant to deal directly with the Catholic Church. As we look at Luther, it's his 95 Theses are not a direct attack on the church. They're supposed to be these religious questions, these kind of more philosophical questions that are meant to be debated and talked about by theologians. So I don't know that there are any social outcomes to this, except for the fact that these reformers are going to be a little bit more careful in dealing with the Catholic Church directly. Luther, as noted, kind of makes sure that he has the backing of Frederick before he goes off to the Diet of Worms in 1521. He's not going to go in there blind. How many theses? All right. I'll see you guys later. Have a great night. You can email me with any other questions you might have, and take care.